Hello, everybody, and welcome. We still have people entering into the room. So while we have people entering the room, just as a quick housekeeping note, for the participants there, either by like raising your hand with like the raise hand function or telling us in the Q&A or chat box, can you confirm that one, you can hear me, two, you can see me, and three, that you see this slide that says MBA application workshop and has a picture of a building? All right, perfect. Thank you. See all those raised hands. Perfect. All right, I'll give it maybe like 20 more seconds. I see it's slowing down. Cool. All right, we're at a halt, so let's get started. So hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Glen Nuenighoff. I'm the Associate Director of Operations on the MBA admissions team at Georgetown. So for the next hour or so, I'll be doing an application workshop for those interested in applying to the full-time Flex and/or Flex Online MBA programs. This also includes our MBA dual degree programs and deferred enrollment program, MBA Advanced Access Program, otherwise known as MAP. Those are specifically associated with our full-time MBA program. I understand that for some of you, this might be your very first Georgetown MBA webinar or event that you've attended. So before I take a deep dive into the workshop itself, I'll do a very brief overview of the differences between these programs. But before I do, a couple of housekeeping notes. So I'll be spending the next 45 minutes on this workshop, and then we'll save the last 10-ish, 15-ish minutes or so on any questions that you might have and do a little Q&A session. So with that being said, if you have any questions throughout the workshop, feel free to enter those into the Q&A box. And with that in mind, I want to introduce my colleague, Jonathan Crawford, that you see here. We both work on our operations team, and he'll be assisting with the Q&A. So if you have any questions, again, enter them into the Q&A box. We have a larger group than normal, given that we're in the lead up to our round 2 application deadline, which is on January 4th, which I'll explain in a bit more detail later in the workshop. It's our highest volume time in terms of applications, so we'll do our very best to get to all the questions as we can within this hour period. So you can respond to some of your questions in the Q&A box, but again, if we're unable to get to them, then we'll try to get to them at the last 10 minutes or so during the Q&A portion. Also joined with us is Grace Morris. So she joined our team as a full-time staff member last week. So she'll just be behind the scenes shadowing, so she can learn more about things applications. So with all that out of the way, in terms of housekeeping notes, I do want to discuss the differences between the full-time Flex and Flex Online MBA programs. The main thing to keep in mind is that it's the same exact degree. It's an MBA degree. Whether you're in the full-time Flex or Flex Online MBA program, you're going to have the same resources, such as our Career Center. You're going to be taking the same curriculum. You're going to have the same credit requirements. And by and large, you're going to be going through the same application process. Really, the biggest difference is just the formatting. So the full-time MBA program is a standard 2-year MBA program where you pause your career for 2 years and you're a full-time student, with the exception of an internship during your time in the program, typically during the summer between your first and second years of the program. And then for Flex and Flex Online, it's a part-time program. It's really tailored for those who are working professionals that want to maintain their jobs while they take classes on a part-time basis. Typically in the evenings, on a typical week, 2 classes at a time, 2 days a week, but you do have some flexibility. So rather than being locked into the program for a certain period of time, you can finish the degree anywhere from a little over 2 years to 5 years. And so for the Flex program, in terms of the mode of the activities, like classes and events and things like that, it's exactly like the full-time program. It's all on our campus, which you can see here on the screen. And then for Flex Online, it's almost entirely online, with the exception of 3 one-week-long residencies throughout your time in the program. 2 of those residencies are on our campus, and then 1 is somewhere abroad. And location to be determined, you would know more closer to that time. That would be towards the very, very end of your experience in the program. Keep in mind that each program begins in the fall of each year. So if you're looking to submit an application for a fall 2024 program start, I hope this application workshop is helpful for you. But if you're applying to begin the MBA program, let's say in fall 2025, this information should be very, very relevant, but things are certainly subject to change this time next year. But by and large, a lot of this information will still be relevant. And then last thing I want to reiterate is that whether you're applying to the full-time Flex or Flex Online MBA program, is that this application process is by and large the same. So all the information that I'll be covering in the workshop today will be relevant for each program. All right. So the holistic approach. So at a very, very high level, these are big application requirements. A set of advice, this literally goes for any program that you're considering applying to, whether that's an MBA at a different university or not even an MBA program, maybe like a MPP program at Georgetown or even at another university. Start an application, skim through it, get a general understanding of what's going to be expected of you, how much time it's going to take you to compile all these components, kind of game plan from there. So just to set your expectations in terms of timing and what sort of requirements you'll need to submit. So in terms of our approach when we are reviewing applications, so I'm part of our admissions committee that does everything from interviewing to reviewing MBA applications. We have to take a very holistic approach when we are reviewing applications because we understand that applicants are coming from various different backgrounds and they're not all equal. People are coming from different undergraduate institutions. They have different majors, everywhere from political science to engineering to accounting. People are coming from different work experiences. We have people that are coming from different parts of the world. So with that being said, there's no specific weightage, for example, that any application component has, but each component helps us understand you better as an aspiring MBA applicant. So a common question we get is like, oh, how much percentage weightage does like a GMAT score report have on my application? There is no such weightage. There's every application component we look at is one data point of many that we review when assessing our decisions. So, and then when we break out this into quantitative and qualitative measures, which I'll talk about right now. So in terms of quantitative measures, we'll look at things like your academic history, which I'll explain very shortly. We'll look at things like test scores, as well as look at your years of work experience. So in terms of academic history, the stats you see here on the left are from our most recent incoming class. And these are comparable year over year. And to clarify, these GPAs are from bachelor's degrees that were earned in the US who operate on a 4.0 scale of all of our admitted, all of our incoming students. So, so yeah, for example, if you went to school in Canada and you got your bachelor's degree in Canada and they also operate on a 4.0 scale, your GPA, that GPA would be omitted from this. So these are strictly US schools, bachelor schools who operate on a 4.0 scale, which is the majority of US schools. And then in terms of averages year over year, they're around a 3.3 to 3.4. And we do not have a minimum GPA requirement. So as you can tell, this is a pretty wide range in terms of the GPAs that we've accepted, or GPAs of our incoming students. So logistically, in terms of what will be required from you, so we'll require transcripts from all of your transcripts and grade scales, so we can understand how your classes are graded or how your classes were evaluated. All transcripts and grade scales from all of your undergraduate level education and beyond. So we don't need high school transcripts. So for example, a common thing I see is I'm looking at a bachelor's degree transcript and I see courses that were transferred in like AP credits or IB. We don't need transcripts from your high schools, but ultimately, big picture and to keep in mind is that we need to see all of your classes and letter grades from undergrad and beyond. So more specifically, let's say you transfer credits in from a community college or a study abroad school. Ultimately, we want to see how you performed in those classes. So I won't go into a crazy amount of detail about this here because every school, every school reports transfer credits differently. So I don't want to confuse anybody. So I do want to point out that there's a short questionnaire in the educational background section of the application. So you can understand which transcripts and grade skills you need to submit. So just keep in mind, but I'll reiterate that the high level thing that we want to know is we need to see all of your classes and letter grades from undergrad and beyond. So if there's a letter grade on there, or if we see a class on your transcript that just shows that like it transferred in and you passed the class, that's great. But we want to know how you performed. Did you get a C in that class? Did you get an A? So those are things that we're going to be looking at. So I mentioned undergraduate education and beyond. So this includes any master's level transcripts, for example. So if you've either earned another master's degree or you are in an in-progress master's degree, or you were in a master's program, you discontinued it. Ultimately, we want to see how you perform there, and so you need to submit your transcripts and grade skills from those schools or that school. And in terms of the evaluation of all these documents, of all these grade scales and transcripts, yes, your final GPA is important, but we certainly look beyond it. So we'll review things such as academic progression, trends, certain quantitative classes that you've taken. So I'll make a comment about our optional essay, which is relevant for academic history, but this is also relevant for any part of your application. So if there's any part of your application where you feel that you just need to provide additional context that you weren't otherwise able to explain in the application, use the optional essay section of the application to explain that context. So for example, a common thing I see with transcripts, well, I wouldn't say common, but we see it. Let's say freshman, sophomore year classes, great, consistent AB student. And then you get to the junior year part of the transcript and you see a large dip in grades. So C's, D's, maybe a couple F's. And then senior year, it was back to that, consistent AB performance. If I'm just looking at the transcript in isolation, I'm kind of left guessing, well, why did the performance dip? Was it the type of classes that were taken? Was there something, I don't know, going on with their schedule, their life schedule during that period of time where their grades dip? And a transcript's not going to tell us all this context. So I've seen optional essays where people have explained that they had to work full-time while they were supporting themselves and their family while they're a full-time student. A transcript's not going to tell you that. Some people have explained that, maybe they went through a medical condition that took them out of class, which force them to withdraw from classes and things like that. A transcript isn't going to tell you that. So reiterate, if you have any context you feel that is important for us to know, use the optional essay section of the application, not just for academic history, but any part of your application you feel that more context needs to be provided. Okay, test scores. So we accept the GMAT, GRE, or executive assessment. We do not have a preference over which test someone takes. And then again, the stats that you see here on the left are from our most recent incoming class, comparable year over year. And just like we don't have a GPA minimum, we don't have a test score minimum. But these ranges to give you a general idea of what we've admitted in the past. And just to give you a general sense of averages, average GMAT year over year, somewhere around a 690, 700. Average GRE is roughly around like a 320 total. In terms of the executive assessment, we don't have these stats up here simply because it's a relatively new test that is out there and has been accepted. And also the majority of applicants take the GMAT or the GRE. So the sample size is pretty small. But anecdotally, of those we've admitted into the program, generally speaking, they've scored about a 150 total or above. And we look for people to get at least 10 in each section of the test. So if you're considering taking the executive assessment, that's something to consider, but we've certainly admitted people below those thresholds. We've certainly not admitted people above those thresholds. So again, back to a similar point I made earlier, this is an important application component, but keep in mind there's no specific weightage to this. And it's one component of many as we evaluate your application. And a big reason why we request standardized tests, and this goes for really any MBA program, is that there's going to be a high level of quantitative rigor in any MBA program. And a standardized test is a great way to show off your quantitative ability. And especially if you're coming from a non-traditional, non-quantitative background. So you can show off your quantitative skills. So I understand that this application component gives applicants the most worry, but keep in mind this is one data point of many that we're going to be reviewing. So, for example, a strong bachelor's performance, let's say with strong quantitative indicators, like you got A's and B's in various quantitative courses, like in finance, statistics, accounting, you name it, could offset, let's say, a poor test score. So, with all that being said, I realize that test waivers are commonplace nowadays. So what I'm going to do, we do have a test waiver policy, which I'm about to talk about. I have a couple of links here that I want to share with everyone. So this first one is goes to our application components page, and it just shows the test score requirements, a lot of things that I've already explained. But more specifically, here's another link. You can find these links I'm about to share in the link I just sent. But so I'll first talk about the full-time program. The test waivers for full-time versus flex and flex online are a little bit different. So if you're considering a test waiver for the full-time MBA program, this requires you to submit a test waiver application and to be granted a test waiver. So all of the details are in that second link that I just sent. So keep in mind that it requires you to submit a test waiver application. It's pretty short and simple. And then it requires you to be granted a test waiver. There's no application fee or anything like that with a test waiver application. Ultimately, in terms of to be properly reviewed for one, just make sure that you start an application in our application portal so we can tie your test waiver application to it so we know who we're reviewing. It will make a bit more sense when you review the application details that are in those links that I just sent. So for Flex and Flex Online, if you're considering one of those programs, let me send you this link. So this third link has all of our test waiver criteria. So for Flex and Flex Online. So no test waiver application required for this. However, in the MBA application itself, if you meet the test waiver criteria and you choose to not submit a standardized test, you'll be required to attest that you meet the test waiver criteria. So make a bit more sense in terms of, once you see that in the test score section of the MBA application. But if you have any questions about that after starting an application, feel free to reach out to us. We'd be happy to elaborate. Cool. And then in terms of, whoops, I skipped. Sorry about that. There we go. Years of work experience. So we also will evaluate your years of work experience. We'll also require you to submit a resume, which I'll talk about in a future slide. But so first, I want to define what years of work experience is, because this is like an industry standard. So for a little bit of context, let's say if you're looking at MBA rankings of the top 100 MBA programs in the United States, this is by like the Princeton Review or Financial Times or whatever the organization is. This is one metric of many that they look at to come up with those rankings. So it has to be standardized across all schools. So years of work experience is all full-time paid work experience after earning your bachelor's degree. So average years of work experience year over year is about 5 years. What you see here is what we've had for full-time and Flex's most recent incoming class. And then again, it's comparable year over year. For Flex Online, I realize those numbers aren't there, but they're a little lower, probably closer to 5, probably slightly below 5. But keep in mind, we have a really wide range of students that are coming into the program. We have people that in some cases have 10 to 15 years of work experience, and in some other cases, we have people that only have 2. In the cases where you'll have less than 2 years of work experience or more than 10 years of full-time work experience, you could submit an optional essay, explain why an MBA makes sense for you at this point of your career. That's another way you could utilize the optional essay section of the application. So, and then we also want to evaluate not only the amount but the quality of work experience that you have. Again, another reason why we we ask for your resume, and we do things such as interview, again, which I'll talk about in a second. But switching gears a little bit, I want to talk about the qualitative measures of the application that we look at, so things you cannot quantify, like a test score or GPA, anything like that. So recommendation. So we want to understand you better as a professional. First, I'll cover the logistics of how this works exactly. So in the application itself, there's a recommendation section where you will enter in your recommenders information, like their first name, last name, email address, et cetera, et cetera. After you complete that section, a form will be emailed directly to your recommender, and then that form must be completed and submitted to complete the recommendation requirement of your application. We understand that some recommenders prefer to submit something like a formal letter. That is fine, but ultimately to complete the recommendation requirement of your application, they have to submit the form that's emailed to them. So if they do have a formal letter that they want to provide, they're more than welcome to attach that letter to the bottom of the form that I've just mentioned, but they'll still need to complete all required fields and submit the form. And if there's like questions on this form, which consists of multiple choice questions and some open-ended responses that we ask for, if their letter clearly answers one of those questions, they don't need to reinvent the wheel and come up with a new response, or even copy and paste their response from their what they put in their letter into the form. They can simply type in something as easy as like see attachment or see attached letter, something that draws attention to like, okay, they've provided detail in this document that they've attached to their recommendation form. So that's it in terms of logistics. In terms of what we're looking for in terms of recommendations, we only require one recommendation, and quite frankly, we strongly prefer that only one is submitted. The only times I would suggest anyone to submit two is if they have two different people, let's say like two different, like a current supervisor and a former supervisor, both coming from different companies, very different roles, very different industries, that can basically talk about you in two very, very different ways. That will ultimately provide us new information. That's when I would encourage it. But ultimately, we really just require one, and generally speaking, just prefer the one. And in terms of who your recommender is and who you choose, we strongly recommend that it comes from your current direct supervisor, because they, in theory, should have the most recent anecdotes and examples of accomplishments, understanding your daily tasks, attitude in the workplace, and the list goes on. Now, I keep harping back to the optional essay. I swear this is not a required part of the application. We understand that there are scenarios where using your current direct supervisor makes no sense. So you could know your current direct supervisor for a month when you submit your application, or you just don't want your current direct supervisor to know that you're looking to leave, and that could affect your place in terms of advancement within your company and things like that. So if you find that yourself in that situation, that's perfectly okay. Use the optional essay section of the application to explain why you did not choose your current direct supervisor and why you are choosing to use a former supervisor. You're not going to get penalized in any sort of way. That just helps us give us context and leaves us not guessing in terms of why you are keeping this away from your direct supervisor, why you wouldn't want your direct supervisor to submit the recommendation. So, but yeah, that's it in terms of recommendations. Feel free to ask any questions you have about that in the Q&A. Okay, resume. So try to keep it to 1 to 2 pages. 1 page preferable, but if you feel that it needs to get to 2 pages, you're welcome to do that. I would strongly discourage anyone going over 2, to be perfectly honest. Yeah, just to keep it to 1 and 2. If you feel that you can quantify your accomplishments, that would be great, because it helps us understand the impact of the work that you've done. Certainly not a requirement, but I'll give a very arbitrary example of what this could look like. So let's say you're in a sales role and you show your sales stats between year over year, between fiscal year 2022 to fiscal year 2023, and you show that you've increased revenue for the company by $500,000, which is a 20% increase from fiscal year 2022 to fiscal year 2023. That helps us just quantify the impact that you've had on the company and whatnot. So again, not a requirement, but if there's any way you can quantify your accomplishments, absolutely go for it. And then the biggest set of advice I have for the resume, this goes for anyone from any background, any type of industry that you're looking to go into post MBA. I tell this to everyone. Try to ensure that your resume is digestible and understandable for a very neutral audience. So what I mean by that is, let's say you are, you're coming from an engineering background. Eliminate things like industry jargon, acronyms, things like that. So someone from a non-engineering background may not understand. So the reason why I say that is that your resume is going to be looked at from various different people from various different backgrounds. So for example, I'm a higher education professional. I could be reviewing your resume as I'm reviewing your application. And then, let's say fast forward a couple weeks, you're getting interviewed by a current student and they have your resume, but they come from, an accounting background. So we have different perspectives. We might understand different industry jargon and different acronyms. So it's really important that your resume is just understandable for a very neutral audience. So a tip or a tactic you can use is have someone proofread your resume that might not be from your industry. And then after they review it, ask them if they understand what you do, at least in a general sense. So I don't want to say mistake, but like a common thing that I think makes things difficult in terms of being able to review someone's resume and what they do. Sometimes I see an organization that I'm familiar with. It could be like a small family business or something like that. And you see a lot of the duties and responsibilities and accomplishments that they have. Let's just say it's like a sales role. We see that they've sold lots of things, but it's very unclear what they're actually selling. So be very intentional in terms of the way you put your resume together. So for example, where you have your organization listed, doesn't hurt to add a very brief description in terms of what that organization does. Like ABC LLC, steel manufacturer, textile manufacturer, engineering consulting company, like anything along those lines that a very brief gives a better understanding of what you do will be very, very helpful. Okay, essays. So we have one required written essay, and it requires you to pick one essay prompt of 3 that we provide. You don't need to go above and beyond and write 3 essays. You just need to pick one essay prompt and go from there. But I won't go through the specifics of the essay prompts. They're a bit wordy, but ultimately we're asking for ways of how you can contribute to Georgetown, how you can, how you're going to benefit from the MBA and how the MBA program can benefit from you is generally what these themes of these essays are. And the essays are, I believe, a 500 word maximum. So typically 2.5 pages or so, a double spaced is what we see. Video essay. So we have a required video essay. It's meant for you to share interesting facts about yourself within 1 minute. The prompt is here on the screen. And it's really meant for you to share something or some things that are not necessarily work or school related. Sharing personal experiences, interests are very welcome. But if you want to talk more about work, that's perfectly okay. Ultimately, we want to learn new information. So I would steer clear of reading off your resume. We already have your resume. So we want to learn new information. It's a way to add some personality to your application because there's only so much we can learn just by reading off of, in our case, a computer screen. And then in terms of the content of the production value of the video, it doesn't have to be anything special. You're being assessed on the content of what you talk about rather than the production. So it's perfectly okay to have like a blank white wall or brick wall behind you and you talk to a camera for a minute. That's perfectly okay. You can get more creative, like going on a walk with your iPhone and talking for a minute, because who knows, walking might be one of your interests and walking around a particular park that you want to show off. You're welcome to do things like that. to spice things up. But ultimately, if you just talk to a camera for a minute with a neutral background, that's all. That's fine. That's perfectly okay. Okay, interview. So not all applicants will interview, but we do our interviews on an invite basis only. And if you are invited to interview, you just need to interview once, and they're 30 minutes long. And you could be interviewing with a current or former MBA staff member. You could be interviewing with an alumni of the program, or you could be interviewing with a current student. So we purposely go into all these interviews blindly. So you won't know who you're interviewing until you show up for the interview. For example, I'm a current MBA staff member. I do interviews. I don't know who I'm interviewing until like the day of, and then I just have their resume to go off of. And that's just to prevent any sort of bias going into these interviews. So we come in with a very non-biased, like neutral, not attitude, but perspective going into these interviews. So, and in terms of the mode of the interviews, they are either virtual, and we also have some in-person interview options. For example, on campus here in the Rafik Vihari building. And we also have some options where we travel to a city near you and conduct interviews there. As we speak, well, now because of the time difference, I don't think they're happening right now, but over the next week or so, we currently have a representative from our team that is in New Delhi and Mumbai, India, who are doing interviews there. So there could be some scenarios where you can interview with an MBA representative in a city near you. So yeah, now that you have, so actually one thing I want to point out for the interview too, treat it like any other job interview. We want to get to know you better, both, professionally and personally. So treat it, you don't need to be like robotic by any means. You can, show off your personality and all that. But ultimately treat it like any other professional interview. All right. So let's just assume that you've submitted your application. Now what? So once you've submitted your application will be processed for completion. If your application is complete, it will get forwarded to our admissions committee for review. And before the admissions committee can review an application, we must have all required application components. So for example, if you're missing anything, we'll notify you. But for example, some common things we've seen missing are like someone's name missing from their GMAT score report, or their recommender hasn't submitted their recommendation yet, or they have transfer credit grades missing, things like that. So ultimately, make sure that you proofread your application before you submit it. Have someone else look it over to make sure you have all your required components submitted. Because if anything's missing, that could delay the review of your application and have an effect on the review of your application. So again, if once your application is complete, it'll get forwarded to the admissions committee for review. And then, you could be invited for an interview after that time. And then you will eventually get notified of your decision on the decision notification date of the round that you are applying in. And I'll go over a few scenarios and when I talk about application deadlines and other important dates in another slide. So class profiles. You can use this in terms of just soak it in. These are our class profiles and key stats from our most recent incoming class. Biggest thing I want to point out here is just the class sizes. So full-time MBA program is typically anywhere between like 250, 280 at the very, very, very high end in any given year. And that's of like a first year MBA class. So at any given time, since it's a 2-year program, at any given time, there are a little over 500 full-time students at any given time. And then for the Flex program, we have about 100. We had about 100 people in this most recent incoming class. And then our Flex Online program, those stats aren't up here, is a brand new cohort. So our very first ever Flex Online cohort began back in August of this year. In the Flex Online program will really be effectively an extension of the Flex Online, our Flex cohort, which is historically around 150 students or so. So Flex Online, they had a cohort about 49 students. So between Flex and Flex Online, any incoming class collectively will have 150 students or so. Okay, finances, the fun part. So what you see here are tuition and fees for the current academic year. These fees include things like annual health insurance, annual fee to like use the campus gyms, things like that. One thing I really want to point out is that the Flex and Flex Online in this case, because Flex and Flex Online tuition rates are the same. The estimate that you see here on the screen is extremely high, and that's done on purpose. So ultimately, Flex and Flex Online MBA students are charged per credit hour, and the credit hours for this current academic year is 200, just under $2,400 per credit hour. And there's a lot of fees that Flex and Flex Online students can just opt out of. For example, the annual health insurance that the university provides is roughly like a $3,500 amount. Flex and Flex Online students are typically already covered, have health insurance covered by their employer, so they can just opt out of that charge. And then the estimate that you see there too is under the assumption that if you're a Flex student or Flex Online student and you're like completely maxing out the amount of classes that you take, that's what that rate is. But typically, students are taking 6 credit hours per semester or so, and the credit amount per hour this academic year is just under $2,400. So, but a couple things to keep in mind in terms of like short-term and long-term ways to offset costs. For starters, when you apply, you'll automatically be considered for scholarship. So there's no additional application fees, essays, anything like that you need to submit. So along with being reviewed for admission, you're also going to be reviewed for scholarship when myself and other admissions committee members are reviewing your application. And then in terms of long-term return on investment, I do want to share actually, let me see if I can pull it up very, very quickly. Georgetown MBA Employment Report 2023. I apologize. The link that I was going to share was for 2022, but the employment report for the class that just graduated in 2023 just came out quite literally like this week. So let me add this to the chat for everyone. But this will give you a general sense of long-term return on investment in terms of employment numbers, average salaries, things like that. So average salary for graduates of the class of 2023 was around a little over 149,000 in salaries, and the average signing bonus a little over 43,000. And this is the highest it's ever been since I've been with the program, which is awesome to see. But yeah, so application rounds. I think we are almost at time before I want to get to Q&A. So application deadlines. What you see here on the screen are application deadlines, decision notification dates, and deposit deadline for the current admission cycle. I'll get to the deposit deadlines in a second because there's an update to it. So don't let me forget. If I forget, add it to the Q&A section, and we'll address that. So our next application deadline is technically January 4th, which is up for round 2. A little insider information: it has not been publicly announced like over email or anything like that, but we will be having an early round 2 application deadline of December 4th. Now, I want to reiterate, I want to be very transparent and clear. And if you apply by December 4th, you'd be subject to an application fee reduction. You'd have to receive the email that we get. So basically, ensure that you start an application, and I would make sure that there's like a percentage bar that is there that shows like how much progress you've made on the application. Believe that we'll be sending it out to anyone that's above 50%. So start an application, fill out a lot of the fields and whatnot, and then make sure that it's like about at 50% or above. complete in the application portal. So assuming that's the case, you'll probably get a notification probably within the next week and a half or so. I'm not entirely sure about the timing, but I'll let you know about our early round 2 application deadline, and you'll be subject to an application fee reduction. So reduced from $175 application fee to $100. And then you'll get priority interview consideration. So you'd be like effectively the first batch of applicants to be reviewed for admission. And with that being said, you'd be the first to get potential interview invites. So in a way, you're getting a head start in terms of the application review process. Now, big thing to emphasize: make sure that your application is complete on December 4th. So what I mean by that is that, let's say, your recommendation. If you know that your recommender is unable, your recommendation is a required application component. Without your recommendation, we cannot begin the review of an application. If you know that your recommender is unable to submit your recommendation by December 4th, you might as well wait till January 4th to submit your application. Because if your application is incomplete in December, there's a good chance that your application won't be able to be included within this priority interview consideration. You lose effectively a month to be able to work on your application. In a way, it's almost like a rushed application, and you shed off a month of time where you could be strengthening it in certain different ways. So if you know that your application is not going to be complete, for example, you know that your recommender is going to be unable to submit your recommendation by December 4th, I would just hold off until January 4th. Because then you effectively lose the ability, you lose that potential ability of getting into that priority interview consideration. So with that being said, I want to go over what these application deadlines are. So if you apply by if your application is complete and they're up by early round 2, so December 4th, you submit your application then, your application would get reviewed, you get into interview prior to consideration. You'd still be a round 2 applicant, so you'd be getting your decision letter on March 18th. So all round 2 applicants will get their decision letter on March 18th, no sooner, no later. If you are admitted into the program, that's awesome. Your first deposit deadline is on April 18th. What is not on here, and that's still being finalized, is a second deposit deadline. This will be new this year. That second deposit deadline will likely be in mid-May. I believe we're going to keep it to May 13th. That is not finalized yet. But basically, every admitted applicant will be required to submit 2 $2,000 deposits. So $4,000 total. That $4,000 will get credited to your fall tuition bill. So you can think of it as like paying tuition in advance. Historically, we've only required 1 deposit of $2,000. This is a new policy change as of this year. So again, I'll reiterate, if you are admitted in round 2 on March 18th, you'd have a $2,000 deposit due on April 18th, and then a second deposit deadline due presumably on May 13th. Both of those deposits will hold your spot in the incoming class. So to hold your spot in the incoming class, you will have to submit both of these deposits. This 2 deposit deadline applies for any round that you apply in, and each round will have a separate second deposit deadline, which will be published at honestly probably within the next week or 2. So yeah, that's a scenario if you're admitted. Let's say if you are unfortunately denied admission, we would welcome you to reapply next year, and that would be the end of the road for you in this current admission cycle. And then let's say on March 18th, you are waitlisted. We would ask you to reconfirm your spot on the waitlist. We give you a specific deadline, typically no more than a week after March 18th. So within 7 days of March 18th, we'd be setting a deadline for you to confirm your spot on the waitlist. Assuming you confirm your spot on the waitlist by that date, then you would be reevaluated in round 3, and then you would get an updated decision letter on May 1st. So that could be a decision letter to, unfortunately, deny admission. It could be a letter that confirms that we want to have you remain on the wait list, or it could be an admission letter where we admit you into the program. And basically that process repeats in every single round. And then one thing I want to note before we get into questions and whatnot, interview invites. So let's use round two again as an example. If you are a round two applicant, you can get basically interviewed anytime between January 4th and March 18th. There's no particular order that we go in terms of interview invites. So just because someone might interview in January versus someone that interviews in March doesn't make the person who was interviewed in March a less of an applicant than whoever interviewed in January. Particularly in round two, we have just such a high volume of applications relative to the rest of these rounds, where there's really no particular order we can really go into. So there's no particular order in terms of when interview invites are sent out to people and when they interview. If you get an interview invite, expect to interview probably within like a week. Sometimes we have relatively quick turnaround time, so just be prepared for that, to be able to interview maybe within like 48 hours of getting a interview invite. So that's just something to keep in mind. All right, but yeah, that's basically it from me. Stay connected. You can use these QR codes to chat with people like student ambassadors, get like our typical RFI, look at upcoming events, things like that. So with that being said, I'm happy to start taking any questions. We can start the Q&A portion of this. So it looks like, Jonathan, you've answered a lot already. Was there any common themes that I could elaborate on further or anything like that?
International transcripts, evaluations. If you want to provide a little bit more information about that, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah. So for any applicant that did their education abroad, or well, abroad for us, sorry. If you did let's say your bachelor's degree outside of the US, we do not require a WES like evaluation. So for those who are unaware, WES is kind of like a governing body of transcripts across the world. So basically they could take like a transcript, let's say from India, and then they convert that into US standards. So like what would their performance from this school in India convert to into like a 4.0 scale at a US institution? It'll spit out like, oh, their overall performance was a 3.33 on a 4.0 scale. This class equates to an A. This class equates to a B, things like that. We don't need a WES evaluation. Ultimately, you'd need to just submit your transcripts or mark sheets, wherever they call them, along with your grade scale so we can evaluate your academic performance that way. If we need any additional information, we would reach out to you. A lot of the specific requirements are in the application itself. So for example, you might be required to submit, let's say like a document that shows that your school was explicit, like all the medium of instruction was in English. You get prompted to submit those things. So there's a lot of like dynamic and conditional formatting within our applications. So you should be able to follow pretty quickly. Depending on the requirements that you have might require different requirements from other people. I don't want that to confuse people. Just start an application and then you'll be able to figure it out when you're in the educational background section. But a common question that we get is, do I need to submit a WES evaluation, or do I need to get this evaluated by some governing body? The answer is no. The only thing I'll mention though is that we require all of our transcripts to be in English. So if your transcripts or bachelor's degree diploma, that's also a requirement for some people. If those are not already in English, we need to receive them in English. So we can receive the English versions either directly from your school, or you can have a certified translator, like a professional translator, do it. Unfortunately, we can't accept any like self translations. So hope that answers that. Yeah, so from Divya's follow-up question, so you don't need course by course evaluations, right? Yeah, correct. We do not need course by course we need your transcripts from your school. So you would attach those to your application, but we don't need those transcripts to be evaluated by an institution like WES, WES for those who are. Let me just let me provide a link for people so we're on the same page. WES.org. So I just added that to the chat. This is the organization I'm talking about. So yeah, we do not require evaluations from organizations like WES. We just need your transcript and grade scales. And if you earned your bachelor's degree outside of the US, let's say like an Indian institution, we'll need to see your bachelor's degree certificate or diploma. Every school, country calls it different. Ultimately, same thing. We need proof that we need confirmation of that you graduated, essentially. So yeah, so if you have your university transcripts in English scan, that's okay. So this goes back to my point. So if you start an application, there'll be specific instructions in these sections, like in the educational background section. So it'll ask you to attach a PDF or a Word, or they're typically PDFs of your transcript. So that could be scanned. That could be a PDF that your school emails to you. It could be one of those things. Ultimately, we need to see your transcripts attached to your application. In terms of official documentation, like we don't need your schools to email or mail your official transcripts to us at this stage of the applications cycle. That comes after someone's admitted and whatnot. So I won't go down that road. But ultimately, to apply, you just need to attach your transcripts to your application, as well as your grade scales, as well as your bachelor's degree diploma / certificate. And these can be like scanned copies of the physical copies that you might have. Yes, so unofficial transcripts are okay. So actually, let me pull up I'm going to define these for everybody between official versus official documentation. So give me 1 second. I'm going to copy and paste some things in here. Here we go. I'm going to add this to the chat. Oh, of course, that's not formatted really well, but you can copy and paste it and put this into a Word document or something. But so yeah, any transcripts, diplomas, degree certificates, same thing goes with like test scores. Anything that is attached to your application or is emailed directly to our office is technically an unofficial document. We just need unofficial documents to review someone's application. Now, when you apply, don't email your documents and say, hey, can you attach this to my application? That's what these attachments in the application themselves are there for in the application. So attach these documents to your application. They're technically unofficial documents when we receive them that way, but that is fine. That is what we need to review an application. Official documents are not required until someone's admitted into the program and they submit their deposit, in this case, deposits. So documents are official if they are physically mailed or electronically sent, let's say over email. They're sent to our office directly from your institutions, so not directly from a student or incoming student in this case. They're sent directly to us by your institution. Or if they are hand delivered to our office, I won't go over those. Those are a lot of details that just don't need to get covered right now. Some of your schools might use a electronic delivery service, kind of like the FedEx or UPS or United States Postal Service version of electronic transcripts to send transcripts. That's fine also. But hopefully this clarifies the difference between unofficial and official documents. I want to reiterate, we only need unofficial documents to review your application. So if an applicant is unable to submit their application by the December 4th deadline, but has completed over 50% of the application, they will still receive the application fee reduction? No, so to use this specific application fee reduction code, your application will need to be complete by December 4th. So that's specific for this option that I'm mentioning, this early round 2 application deadline. So the application fee reduction code that you get would be valid up until December 4th. So there's no, so the code isn't, so the question is, where can I find the code? The code doesn't exist right now. It needs to be created. So ultimately the code would be provided in the email that is sent out to people about the early round 2 application deadline. Is there a reason why the December 4th deadline is not online? Partially it's because the details are still being worked out about it. But ultimately an email blast will go out about it. And we'll have some information on our website when it's finalized. But I'm just sharing this information because it's going to be final very, very soon. Just to give you guys a heads up, and I might as well just share it. But more information will be shared over email as well as on our website in the coming weeks. Here's a question. So would submitting a GMAT focus score potentially have an adverse effect on our evaluation? Are the traditional GMAT/GRE scores preferred? So for those who are unaware, the GMAT is going through a transition, and they have rebranded/restructured their GMAT exam. It is now going to be called the GMAT Focus Edition. And it's going to test differently. It's going to be shorter, et cetera, than the previous GMAT version of the exam. So ultimately, there's no adverse effect. We won't have a preference over which. We don't have a preference over which test anyone takes, whether it's GMAT Focus Edition, GRE, Executive Assessment. Take the test you feel most comfortable taking. It is worth noting that the GMAT Focus Edition and the GMAT are only going to be overlapping for like 3 months. I believe starting like January 2024, they're going to completely discontinue the GMAT exam, and they're only going to be offering the GMAT Focus Edition. So that's worth noting. But ultimately, it's the same. It's just a revamped version of the original GMAT exam. And yeah, they rebranded it. It's a shorter exam. Section questions are a bit different, things like that. But yeah, ultimately, we don't have a particular preference over which test someone takes. And it's worth noting that the old version of the GMAT will be gone quite literally in a matter of a couple months. So, all right, I know we have about 1 more minute, so we'll take maybe one last minute question if we have any. But it looks like this is pretty efficient. We've gone through a lot. All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming. Appreciate you taking the time out of your day for about an hour to learn more about the MBA application process. So yeah, if you have any questions moving forward, feel free to reach out to us. We'd be happy to help. Get connected with us using these QR codes. So yeah, have a great rest of your day and hope to see you apply to Georgetown. Have a good one.